Alright, welcome to the channel. My name's James and today I'm going to take you through how I painted my Deathwing Terminators. I wanted to create a more grimdark and textured look to my Marines, so if that's something that takes your fancy, all the paints you'll need will be listed below in the description, and let's get into it. I wanted to create more of a grimdark look to my Deathwing Terminators, so I've built up a lot of texture and information throughout the armour panels, and I've done this using mainly dry brushes. We're going to be starting off with some Karak stone, screaming skull and Wraithbone to build up the armour. Starting off from a Mournfang brown base, I applied this with an airbrush, but you can do it with a brush or any other warm brown will work. Then grab a medium dry brush. I'm using one from Artist Opus here because it has slightly stiffer bristles. I'm not sure if this will work as well with makeup brushes, but feel free to give it a shot. Dampen the brush ever so slightly and then start to stipple the Karak stone all over the armour. We're looking to build up texture and information during this process. We're not worried about even coats, hitting any of the details, getting it into the recesses. We're just smashing that paint onto the armour. So you can see I'm holding the brush reasonably far back from the ferrule. This just ensures that we're applying the paint with a light pressure and avoids the brush starting to splay out. So you want to build this up over two thin layers to ensure you're not introducing any unwanted texture within the model. So although we're stippling and using dry brushes here, you still need to thin your paint down ever so slightly. Once that's dry, grab some brown contrast paint. I'm using Wasteland Brown from the Express colour range, but any other brown will do. You could probably even get away with using a wash. But I've thinned this down with some medium and some water, and we're just applying it all over the armour. If it starts to pool on any large surfaces, just clean off your brush and wipe away the excess. So now we want to start building up our highlight patterns within the armour. I'm using an extra small dry brush because it gives me a bit more control, but I'm applying the paint in exactly the same technique. We're stippling on the Karak stone over the previous layer. We're focusing on the areas where the light would naturally interact with the model and also focusing on those volumetric highlights within each of the components. Now whenever you apply the Karak stone, it will look like there's a big difference between the previous layer and this layer, but it's only because the paint's still wet. Whenever it dries, it'll soften out and it'll become a bit more muted. So continue to work around the model, think about the different shapes that you're highlighting and how the light would interact with those. Again, build up the colour in 1 to 2 passes depending on how intense you want it to be and how much of the previous layer you want to show through. Now grab a bit of Screaming Skull and start to refine that highlight pattern using the same stippling technique. We're going to focus a bit more towards the edges and towards the more dominant highlight areas across the model. This will start to introduce more texture and more weathering and battle damage across the model. You'll see I'm working a bit further down the brush now, a bit closer to the ferrule, giving me some extra control and allowing me to be more precise with my application. We're really focusing on bringing attention to those volumetric highlights and creating that almost shine effect within the textured armour. And by repositioning the model and holding the brush at a different angle, you're able to work it into quite small and recessed areas. So use this to your advantage across the model to create those nice thin and refined highlights in various places. Finally coming in with some Wraithbone for that final highlight. Whenever you're applying this, do it in exactly the same way but leave some of the Screaming Skull showing. Really focus on the brightest areas within each of the different volumes to really bring attention to the different shine points and reflections within the armour. And you might be thinking it looks a bit rough and ready right now, but don't worry, whenever we add in some more weathering and some more battle damage to the model, it'll really help to sell this textured effect within the armour. Plus we'll be complementing it with some nice smooth gradients on the other elements within the model, so it creates some really cool contrast between those different areas. So once you're happy with all your highlights, grab yourself some Rhinox hide or an equivalent dark brown, and we're coming in again with the extra small dry brush, and we're just going to place a few chips in the armour. Now you can be quite aggressive at this stage, but I recommend that you don't go too over the top. So try to hit the edges of the different armor panels or where damage would naturally occur on the model. Build it up over a number of passes so you can get some variety and different shapes within the chipping. So grab yourself some Abaddon Black or your favorite black paint, and we're going to use this to clean up the rest of the model. So we're going to apply 1 to 2 even coats over any of the areas that are going to be metallics or any of the other additional details across the model. Whenever you're doing this, make sure you cover up the eye lenses and any additional lenses or gems or things across the model as well. Do take your time though and try not to hit any of the cream sections, and if you do, quickly clean off your brush and wipe it away. So you can see even whenever we clean up all those components, it already makes the paint job look more refined, more detailed and more interesting. And for maybe like 10 to 15 minutes work, I think this creates a really interesting and cool looking cream armor. Grab some exhaust manifold and we're going to start to lay down the foundation for all of our metallics. Now because we're going with this sort of grim dark look to our marine, we want to keep our metallics quite dark here, so exhaust manifold is a great colour for this. And you should be able to get all of your metallics done in just one pass, which is the great thing about the metal color range. Now you may notice I went a wee bit over the top with the chipping and weathering on my fist, so I'm coming in with a bit of exhaust manifold to look like there's some exposed metal underneath that paint. But I really wanted my Terminator to look like you've been given the Fallen a good fisting. Now grab a bit of Nuln Oil or your preferred black wash and just apply that all over the silver sections. You can apply it to the fist as well to help dull down some of those metallics and just to create a wee bit more separation in those areas. It'll just help to add to that weathered look. Now come back in with the exhaust manifold, we're just going to add a quick couple of highlights to the silvers. So just a bit of additional detail towards the edge of the fist if you're like me and went a wee bit heavy. Add in a quick line highlight along some of these details, and then on the gun just a few highlights to the barrel and any of the sections that are perpendicular to the light source. Make sure to grab those rivets as well. So for all the red components in the model, we're going to be starting from a base of Corn Red, followed by some Mephiston Red and then some Evil Sunz Scarlet. Apply a nice even coat of Corn Red over the purity seals and over the gun casing. This should only take 1 to 2 passes to ensure you get a nice even layer. Took me a while to find the second purity seal here. So I'm going to be using a Series M size 2 for pretty much the remainder of the video here, but if you need to use a smaller brush, by all means get whatever you're comfortable with and get working with that. Also apply a nice even layer of Corn Red over any of the lenses on the model as well. Take your time whenever you're doing this as well. Try not to hit any of the cream sections, as red has a real tendency to stain quite quickly. Then coming in with our Mephiston Red, we're going to start to highlight any of the areas that are perpendicular to the light. So we want to catch pretty much the entirety of the top of the gun, and then we're going to create a gradient along the side of it. So whenever I'm doing the gradient here, I'm pretty much just applying the paint halfway down the gun and then pulling it towards the bottom. Because we're working with paint that's been thinned slightly, it should create these sort of semi-transparent layers and allow us to create a gradient really easily. Now using some Evil Sunz Scarlet, we're going to build up all of those edge highlights. So position your model in such a way that you can easily drag the side of your brush along any of the edges. Now there are some nice sharp edges along the side of the gun casing as well. I find it easier to pull the line, and whenever I'm doing that I always try to do short lines and pulling them towards myself and then just run over the top of them with one solid smooth line. We're then going to grab some Cadian Flesh Tone and use that just to dot in the corners and any of the rivets on the gun. This just helps create that extra bit of shine on the gun and gives it that almost heavy metal style look. Now with the purity seals I like to create a wee bit of variation, so I'm using the Cadian Flesh Tone and the Mephiston Red. Mix those together about 50-50 to start building up my first highlight, and then coming in with some pure Cadian Flesh Tone just to hit those final few spots. So the Deathwing Terminators have these like stone icons on various parts of their armor. It almost has like a non-metallic-esque look to it whenever it's painted in the box art. So we're going to be starting off with some Mechanicus standard grey here to lay down our foundation. We're going to be trying to just create a nice even and consistent layer across all of these areas, leaving the recesses black. So any of the steps that I explained for the shoulder pad, I'll be doing exactly the same thing on the knee. So once you've applied 1 to 2 coats of your Mechanicus standard grey, we're going to come in with some Dawnstone and start building up our highlight pattern. So there's a few areas that we want to focus on to really build up that sort of shine effect within these stone emblems. That's going to be the top of the forehead and the curve at the top of the skull, the orbital bones, eyebrows, and around the cheekbones. And then we want to focus on that sort of top quarter as well, and then we're going to work pretty much halfway down the 2 bits at the side. We'll add in a couple of bounce highlights just underneath there, just to create that more interesting reflection pattern. But you can kind of see what we're going for here with this approach. Don't worry too much about the difference in value in these colours while the paint's still wet. Whenever it dries, it will soften out, and as we build it up over a couple of semi-transparent layers, it'll even out and become a nice soft gradient. Each time whenever you're building up your highlights, ensure that you're leaving some of the previous layer showing so you can create these gradients. But you should be aiming for something that looks a bit like this once you've applied your first round of highlights. Again, just adding in that bounce light towards the bottom. Next we're coming in with some Zinc white mixed with some Dawnstone. You can use any white for this as well. I just grabbed Zinc white because it was the first one that came to hand. We're going to start to add in a few more refined highlights, sort of picking out 2 highlight spots on either side of the top of the skull. Again, focusing around those orbital bones, so the eyebrows and the cheekbones. And then we're just starting to refine everything else. So again, focusing on that sort of top quarter section and then the top of the 2 side sections. Anywhere where we've sort of done those bounce lights and those reflections underneath will not really highlight any further than just the Dawnstone. Add in a couple of dots to the crossbones just to bring a wee bit of attention towards those details. Finally, just coming in with some pure Zinc white, just hit the brightest areas within this icon. So really working on that top quarter, again hitting those 2 like reflection points at either side of the top of the skull, the crossbones, just bringing a wee bit more focus to those, the very top of those side sections, and maybe a wee touch or 2 around the orbital bones as well. But really the goal here is just to try and maximize that shine and create that almost reflective quality to this detail. And again, like I said earlier, anything that I've done on the shoulder, I've done exactly the same thing with the knee. So now we're going to get to work on the Aquila. I wanted to create something that had a bit more of like a jade look to it, so that's why I've got the Kabalite green for that kind of turquoisey colour in there. But we're going to start off with a nice even application of some Rift Green over that, just to create a nice foundation. We're going to follow that up with a mix of Kabalite green and Rift Green. Again, we're just going to focus on creating highlights in a few select areas to create that almost shine within this component. So we're going to focus along the top of the wings, and then we're going to paint the skull very similar to how we did on the shoulder, focusing on the forehead and the orbital bones and the cheekbones. And then we're just going to highlight towards the tip of each feather. Now I basically want to repeat this process with the Kabalite green. Again, focus on creating that shine in this component as well. We want that to contrast nicely with the armour. So again, just grabbing the top, the edge of each feather, and creating those nice highlight patterns within the skull. Then mixing a bit of Heike yellow into your Kabalite green, or I think Dorn yellow is the Games Workshop equivalent. And we're going to use those just to really drive home that reflective pattern within this surface and create that almost jade marble-like look to this element. Again, we're just highlighting the skull, very similar to how we did on the shoulder, creating that nice reflective point on the top of the forehead, or the curve at the top of the skull, and then picking out some of the details in the orbital bones, and then working towards the edge of each of the wings. We're then coming in with a pretty much Heike yellow dominant mix here with very little Kabalite green in it, just enough to tint it slightly to add in the final reflection points within the skull and the wings. But a super quick highlight pattern in this area that does create a lot of contrast and a lot of interest and a lot of focus around the front of the model. So there's only one or two things that we need to finish off now, and I'm using some golden yellow to add in some additional highlights to the lenses. We started off from that base of corn red, and then we're coming in with some Mephiston red to add in the first highlight. Now whenever you're highlighting gems or lenses, you want to create a gradient from a dark color into a bright color. And the bright color appears on the opposite side from where the light enters. So we're creating our highlights towards the inside and lower edge of each lens. You can also see my big bald head bobbing in the bottom corner there. Don't let that distract you from the main content. By mixing in a bit of golden yellow into our Mephiston red, we're just going to add in an additional highlight, leaving some of the Mephiston red showing. And even if you make a mistake, you can dampen your brush and wipe it away really quickly. Then adding some more golden yellow into the mix, pretty much creating a nice bright orange color. We're just going to add in the last highlight towards the inner corner of each lens, or the opposite side from where the light's coming in. Finally, grabbing some zinc white, we're just going to place a wee dot highlight into the darker side of each lens here. So I usually try to brace against my hobby holder whenever I'm doing this, and I always test it out on my nail beforehand to ensure that I can place a dot with confidence into each of those components. Now we just need to add in a couple of quick highlights of Mechanica Standard Grey and Dawnstone to the rubberized sections between the armour plates, and then finish it off with some Abaddon Black script on the purity seals. And with that, he's pretty much finished. All we have to do is pop him on a base and pop him on the spinny thing and get a proper close-up look at him. But I think this is a super effective way to paint your Deathwing Terminators. It creates that almost grimdark look to the armour, but it's more refined because of those reflection patterns that we put in the armour and all of that texture that we built up over those multiple stages of stippling. We've also got those nice shiny surfaces that complement with the finish of the armour, the almost non-metallic metal quality of the knee and the shoulder, and then those nice bright lenses that really draw attention in towards the face. If you want to see how I made the base, there'll be a link up in the top corner somewhere, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Hopefully you found that useful. If you have any comments, questions or suggestions for future videos, please drop them below in the comments. And if you want to take your painting to the next level, I have a Patreon that's focused around feedback and coaching. You also get access to exclusive guides and content. If you want to show me what you've been working on or what you've been using these videos for, please head over to the Discord and drop some pics into the whips or the completed projects. I would love to see what you've been doing. Just want to say thank you again for watching, and I'll catch you at the next one. All links can be found below in the description, and don't forget to like and subscribe.